Before we descend into the rain-slicked streets of 1985 Washington, D.C., where a single mistake could cost a person their freedom forever, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. These stories from the archives are only just coming to light, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Now, to understand how the Central Intelligence Agency managed to dismantle a decade-long intelligence operation in the span of a single weekend, we must first look at the weather. It was November 14th, 1985, a Thursday. The kind of autumn day in the American capital that feels less like a season and more like a warning. A relentless freezing drizzle had settled over the Potomac, turning the marble monuments into gray ghosts against a slate sky. At a nondescript listening post in Maryland, buried beneath a field of corn that had long since been harvested, a magnetic tape reel spun silently inside a windowless room. This was the domain of the National Security Agency, but the man sitting at the console, sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, was CIA. His name was Elias Thorne. He was 34 years old, a signals intelligence analyst who had spent the last 4 years of his life waiting for a sound that might never come. Thorne was looking for what the agency called a squirt. In the parlance of Cold War tradecraft, a squirt, or burst transmission, was a method of communication used by deep cover operatives. It involved compressing a message, usually a series of numbers or coordinates, into a sound file lasting less than a second. To the human ear, it sounded like a glitch, a static pop on a radio frequency. But if you slowed it down, expanded the waveform, and applied the right decryption key, that static became a roadmap. At 7:42 p.m., the reel lurched. A spike appeared on the oscilloscope, glowing green against the black grid. It was a high-frequency burst, emanating from a source somewhere within the chaotic radio traffic of Northern Virginia. Thorne set his cup down. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he rewound the tape. He isolated the second of audio. He played it back at 1/10 speed. Beep-da-da-da-beep. It wasn't random atmospheric noise. It wasn't a taxi dispatcher or a ham radio enthusiast stepping on a frequency. It was structured. It was deliberate. And it was broadcasting on a frequency that Thorne had flagged 18 months earlier as a potential ghost channel used by the KGB residency in D.C. Thorne didn't run. In the intelligence world, running drew attention. He walked calmly to the secure phone on the wall, dialed a 4-digit extension, and waited for the line to click open. "This is Thorne," he said, his voice flat, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding his system. "We have a heartbeat. Initiate the protocol. We have 48 hours. He didn't know why he said 48 hours. It was an instinct, a gut feeling born of studying Soviet operational patterns. When a burst transmission went out, it was usually a summon, a call to action. The KGB didn't risk electronic communication for pleasantries. If they were signaling their assets, it meant something was moving. It meant a drop was scheduled, a package was ready, or someone was preparing to run. Thorne hung up the phone and looked back at the green line on the screen. He didn't know it yet, but he had just fired the starting pistol on the most intense counterintelligence operation of the decade. To understand the significance of that signal, we have to travel 10 miles south to a split-level home in the quiet suburbs of Alexandria, Virginia. This was the home of Arthur Penhaligon. To his neighbors, Arthur was a boring man. He was 45, balding, with a penchant for wearing beige cardigans and tending to his azaleas with obsessive care. He drove a 1979 Ford station wagon and worked, ostensibly, as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized import-export firm based in Georgetown. Arthur Penhaligon was a fiction. His real name was deleted from records in Moscow decades ago. In the files of the first chief directorate of the KGB, he was known simply as the Architect. He wasn't a spy in the James Bond sense. He didn't scale walls or shoot guns. He did something far more dangerous. He managed people. Arthur was a principal agent, a handler who operated deep within enemy territory. He didn't steal secrets himself. He ran a ring of Americans who did. He was the buffer, the cutout. The assets he managed never met a Soviet diplomat, never walked into an embassy, never did anything that would flag them to the FBI's heavy surveillance teams. They only met Arthur. And Arthur, with his beige cardigans and azaleas, was invisible. On that Thursday evening, Arthur was sitting in his den, listening to a shortwave radio. He wore headphones, his eyes closed. When the burst transmission came through, a sudden chirp in his ear, he didn't write anything down. He didn't need to. He had memorized the decryption grid years ago. The message was simple: clean house, Saturday, noon, exfiltrate. Arthur removed the headphones and placed them in a drawer. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain. The order was catastrophic. Clean house meant the operation was compromised. Exfiltrate meant he had to run. But he couldn't just leave. He had a network. He had 3 agents, 3 ordinary Americans he had spent years grooming, manipulating, and controlling. He had to shut them down. He had to collect their final packages of intelligence and ensure they didn't talk. The timeline was brutal. He had until Saturday noon to collect the product, the stolen documents, and make it to a prearranged extraction point where a diplomatic car would smuggle him out of the country. Arthur felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. He wasn't afraid of the FBI. He was afraid of failing his masters. He walked to the kitchen, where his wife, a woman who knew him only as Arthur the logistics manager, was making tea. "I have to go out," he said. "Inventory issue at the warehouse." "In this rain?" she asked, not looking up from her magazine. "It can't wait," Arthur said. He went to the hall closet and put on his raincoat. He checked his pocket for the small yellow piece of chalk he used to mark signal sites. He was about to trigger a chain reaction that would destroy 3 families, but as he stepped out into the cold night, his face was a mask of calm. He was a professional, and he had work to do. By 9:00 p.m., the lights were blazing on the 7th floor of the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The war room for this operation wasn't the high-tech command center seen in movies. It was a cramped conference room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and floor wax. Maps of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia were taped to the walls, covered in acetate overlays. Elias Thorne stood at the head of the table. Sitting around him were 6 people. These were the Ghostbusters, a joint task force of CIA counterintelligence officers and FBI special agents. This kind of cooperation was rare, often marred by bureaucratic infighting, but tonight the stakes were too high for turf wars. "We have a triangulation," Thorne said, pointing to a red circle on the map in Alexandria. "The transmission originated within a 3-block radius of this sector. We cross-referenced the signal signature with the physical surveillance logs from the last 6 months. He slapped a photograph onto the table. It was a grainy black and white image taken from a surveillance van. It showed Arthur Penhaligon buying milk at a grocery store. "This is our guy," Thorne said. "We've suspected him for a year, but he's been cleaner than a surgeon's scalpel. No meets, no drops, no loose talk." But tonight, his radio woke up. He received instructions. "Do we pick him up?" asked Agent Miller, a gruff FBI veteran with a jaw like an anvil. "No," Thorne said immediately. "If we pick him up now, we get 1 man. We get a handler with diplomatic immunity, or a deep cover legend we can't crack in time. We don't want him. We want his network. We want the Americans he's running." Thorne leaned over the table, his eyes scanning the faces of his team. He received a signal. "That means he has to move. He has to contact his assets. We are going to put a blanket on him so tight he won't be able to breathe without us knowing the humidity of his exhalation. We watch him. We let him lead us to the spies. And when the moment is right, we take them all down at once. We have 48 hours. Miller grumbled, checking his watch. "If he's running, he's going to be moving fast. Fast targets make mistakes. But they are also hard to follow." "Then we don't blink," Thorne said. "Get the surveillance teams, the G-men on the street. I want bumper-to-bumper coverage. I want air support if the weather clears. I want listening devices on every payphone within a mile of his house." The room broke into motion. Phones were dialed, jackets were grabbed. Thorne remained standing at the map, staring at the red circle. He knew that out there in the dark, Arthur Penhaligon was starting his car. The game of cat and mouse had begun, but this time, the mouse was carrying a bomb that could blow the cover of every U.S. agent in Europe if the network wasn't stopped. At 7 a.m. on Friday morning, the rain had not stopped. It had evolved into a sleet that coated the windshields of the surveillance cars parked along the streets of Alexandria. Arthur Penhaligon left his house at 7:15 a.m. He didn't go to the warehouse in Georgetown. Instead, he drove a meandering route through the suburbs, checking for a tail. The FBI surveillance team, known as the Ghosts, were experts. They used a box formation, 4 cars rotating positions, so that the target never saw the same vehicle twice behind him. Arthur drove to a public library in Arlington. He parked, walked inside, and went to the biography section. He pulled a book from the shelf, a biography of Ulysses S. Grant, flipped through it, and placed it back. Then he left. To the casual observer, it was nothing. To the Ghosts, it was a signal. He loaded the drop, Agent Miller said over the encrypted radio channel. Hold position. Wait for the pickup. They didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, a beige sedan pulled into the library lot. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 30s, wearing thick glasses and a heavy wool coat. She walked with a slight limp. Visual on target, the radio crackled. Identify. That's Sarah Jenkins. A voice from headquarters confirmed. She's a civilian archivist at the Department of the Navy, high-level clearance, access to submarine propulsion schematics. Sarah Jenkins walked into the library. She went straight to the biography section. She pulled the Ulysses S. Grant book. She didn't open it. She simply slid it into her oversized purse and replaced it with an identical copy she had brought with her. The switch is made, Miller said. Do we take her? Negative. Thorne's voice came over the comms. Not yet. We need to see what she does with it. Does she go home? Does she go to work? We need the evidence chain. Sarah Jenkins drove to a small park near the Potomac. She sat in her car for an hour, reading the book. Inside the hollowed-out spine of the book was a note from Arthur. Endgame. Bring the negative sheets. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the blue mailbox. Sarah's hands shook as she read the note. She was a lonely woman. She had been recruited 3 years ago, not for money, but for attention. Arthur had been the kind, intellectual man who listened to her frustrations about being passed over for promotions. He had made her feel important. Now, he was telling her it was over. She felt a wave of nausea. She had the documents he wanted, microfiche slides of the new Trident missile propeller designs, hidden in a box of tampons in her bathroom. If she gave them to him, she was committing treason. If she didn't, she was terrified he would expose her. She started her car and drove toward the Navy Yard. The surveillance team split. 2 cars stayed with Sarah. 4 stayed with Arthur. The net was widening. While Sarah Jenkins was sweating in her office at the Navy Yard, trying to look normal while stealing state secrets, Arthur Penhaligon was on the move again. He drove to a shopping mall in Tyson's Corner. The mall was a labyrinth of consumerism, the perfect place to lose a tail. Arthur spent an hour walking in and out of department stores, using escalators, stopping abruptly to tie his shoe while scanning the reflections in store windows. The FBI team had to back off, relying on agents on foot to keep visual contact. Arthur went to a payphone near the food court. He dialed a number, let it ring once, and hung up. He did this 3 times. 10 miles away, in a high-tech office park in Reston, a pager went off on the belt of David Moore. David was the opposite of Sarah Jenkins. He was successful, arrogant, and lived beyond his means. He was a senior engineer for a major defense contractor developing radar systems for stealth aircraft. He drove a Porsche he couldn't afford and had a gambling debt that was slowly suffocating him. Arthur Penhaligon owned him. David looked at the code on his pager. 911. He excused himself from a meeting, his heart hammering against his ribs. He went to his office, locked the door, and opened the safe behind his desk. He wasn't supposed to take documents home, but he had been doing it for months. He grabbed a stack of blueprints marked Top Secret, No Foreign. He shoved them into his leather briefcase. He left the office at 11:00 a.m., telling his secretary he had a migraine. He drove his Porsche aggressively, weaving through traffic on the Beltway. The surveillance team struggled to keep up with the sports car on the wet roads. Target 2 is moving fast, the radio barked. He's heading west, toward the countryside. David Moore didn't go to a park or a library. He went to a dead drop site that was brazen in its simplicity. He pulled into a rest stop on I-66. He walked into the men's restroom. He went into the last stall, taped a thick envelope to the back of the toilet tank, and walked out. Arthur Penhaligon arrived at the rest stop 40 minutes later. He retrieved the envelope. In the war room, Elias Thorne watched the markers on the map converge and separate. "We have the engineer," he said quietly. "That's 2. The profile suggests a cell of 3. Where is the 3rd? They were running out of daylight. Friday was slipping away. Arthur had collected one package and signaled another, but the 3rd agent, the crown jewel of the network, was still a ghost. The rain intensified as evening fell over Washington. The surveillance on Arthur Penhaligon was now a massive operation involving over 50 agents. They were monitoring his house from a utility van parked down the street. They had tapped his phone line, though he never used it for business. They had a directional microphone pointed at his living room window, picking up the mundane sounds of television and domestic silence. Arthur was home. He was pacing. The envelope from David Moore was hidden in his freezer, inside a box of frozen peas. He was waiting for the 3rd contact. The 3rd agent was the problem. This agent didn't use dead drops. This agent didn't use pagers. This agent was family. Not Arthur's family, but a family man. A man named Robert Carter. Robert Carter was a tragedy waiting to be written. He was a cryptographer at the State Department. He was a man of impeccable reputation, a deacon in his church, a father of 3 daughters. He had been recruited not by money or ego, but by ideology. In his youth, he had become disillusioned with American interventionism. He believed he was balancing the scales of world power. Arthur had signaled him earlier that day using a mark on a telephone pole near Carter's bus stop, a piece of blue tape. The signal meant, "Emergency meet. Tonight. The cinema." At 8 p.m., Robert Carter kissed his wife, told her he was going to catch a late movie, and walked out of his house. He carried nothing but a folded newspaper. Inside the newspaper, typed on onion skin paper that could be dissolved in water, were the decoding keys for the secure communication link between the State Department and the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. It was the holy grail of intelligence. If the KGB got those keys, they could read every diplomatic cable in real time. Carter took the bus to a movie theater in downtown D.C. He bought a ticket to a comedy. He sat in the back row. Arthur Penhaligon entered the theater 10 minutes later. He sat 2 seats away from Carter. The theater was dark, flickering with the light of the screen. The audience laughed. In the surveillance van, Agent Miller listened to the audio feed from a bug they had managed to plant in Arthur's collar during a bump on the street earlier that day. "Do you have it?" Arthur's voice was a whisper. "It's too much, Arthur," Carter whispered back. "They're changing the codes on Monday. This is useless after Sunday." "It's enough," Arthur hissed. "Pass it." "I can't," Carter said. "I think I was followed." The war room went silent. Had Carter spotted the ghosts? "Don't be stupid," Arthur said. "You're a ghost. Give me the paper." There was a rustling sound. The brush pass. Carter slid the newspaper along the empty seat between them. Arthur picked it up. "Go," Arthur said. "Don't go home. Go to the safe house in Baltimore. Wait for the signal." "What about my family?" Carter's voice cracked. "You have no family anymore," Arthur said coldly. "You have the cause." Carter stood up and walked out of the theater. Arthur stayed for another 20 minutes, laughing at the jokes on the screen, the newspaper resting on his lap. Elias Thorne looked at his team. "We have all 3. The librarian, the engineer, the cryptographer, and we have the architect holding the keys to the kingdom." "Do we take them?" Miller asked, his hand hovering over the red phone. Thorne looked at the clock. It was 10 p.m. Friday. They had been operating for 26 hours. "Not yet," Thorne said. "Arthur still has to collect the package from Sarah Jenkins tomorrow morning, and we need to know where he's taking it. We need the final link, the exfiltration." Friday night stretched into Saturday morning. The tension in the surveillance teams was palpable. Coffee was consumed by the gallon. Eyes burned from staring at monitors. Robert Carter didn't go to Baltimore. He walked the streets of D.C. in the rain. He was a broken man. He stood on a bridge looking at the Potomac, and for a moment the surveillance team thought he might jump, but he didn't. He walked to a diner, ordered a slice of pie he didn't eat, and sat there until dawn. He was paralyzed by the enormity of what he had done. David Moore, the engineer, was at a casino in Atlantic City. He had driven there straight from the dead drop. He was gambling recklessly, trying to numb the panic. He knew deep down that the consulting fee he was about to receive wouldn't buy his life back. Sarah Jenkins was awake in her apartment. She had the microfiche in her purse. She was pacing, rehearsing what she would say to Arthur. She wanted out. She wanted to believe that after this, she would be free. And Arthur Penhaligon slept. He slept the sleep of the disciplined. He had the blueprints. He had the codes. He had one more pickup, and then he would drive to the Soviet compound on Tunlaw Road, toss the bags over the fence, and claim sanctuary. In the war room, Thorne was strategizing the endgame. "We have to synchronize the takedowns," Thorne said. "If we grab Arthur too early, Carter might bolt. If we grab Carter, Arthur flushes the evidence. We need a simultaneous strike. 10:05 a.m., right after Arthur meets Sarah at the blue mailbox." "That's a public street," Miller warned. "Civilians, traffic. It could get messy." "We make it clean," Thorne said. "We use the blocking vehicles. We box them in. No guns unless necessary. We want them in handcuffs, not body bags." Saturday morning broke with a deceptive calm. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a crisp golden light over the wet streets. It was the kind of morning people washed their cars and walked their dogs. At 9:30 a.m., Sarah Jenkins left her apartment. She walked to the corner of Main and 4th, where a blue USPS mailbox stood. She wasn't mailing a letter. She was waiting. Arthur Penhaligon approached on foot. He looked relaxed. He was carrying a reusable grocery bag. The surveillance net tightened. Unmarked vans moved into position at the ends of the block. Agents disguised as joggers and city workers drifted closer. Thorne watched the video feed in the war room. "Steady," he whispered. "Wait for the transfer." Sarah saw Arthur. She didn't smile. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She handed it to him. Arthur took it, nodded once, and turned to walk away. "Go!" Thorne shouted. The street erupted. A van screeched around the corner, mounting the curb and blocking Arthur's path. The side door slid open, and 4 FBI agents in body armor poured out. "Federal agents down! Get down!" Arthur Penhaligon didn't run. He didn't fight. He froze. The shock on his face wasn't fear. It was disbelief. He had been perfect. He had followed every rule. How? Before he could process the failure, he was face down on the pavement, his hands cuffed behind his back. The grocery bag containing the secrets of the U.S. government lay in a puddle next to his head. Sarah Jenkins screamed. She backed away, hyperventilating. "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." An agent gently but firmly took her arm. "Sarah Jenkins, you are under arrest for espionage." At the exact same moment, 300 miles away in Atlantic City, David Moore was pulled from a blackjack table by 2 agents in suits. He dropped his chips. He looked at the agents and simply said, "I'm sorry." And in the diner in D.C., Robert Carter watched the police cars pull up outside. He didn't move. He placed his hands on the table, palms down, and waited for the end of his life as a free man. By noon on Saturday, 42 hours after the initial burst transmission, all 4 suspects were in custody. They were separated, placed in soundproof interrogation rooms at an undisclosed FBI facility. This was the critical phase. Arrests were one thing, convictions were another. The CIA and FBI needed to know exactly what had been passed, who else was involved, and how long the leaks had been active. Elias Thorne observed Arthur Penhaligon's interrogation from behind the one-way mirror. Arthur sat perfectly still. He had invoked his right to silence. He was waiting for the Soviet consulate to intervene. He believed his diplomatic immunity, which he didn't actually have, he was an illegal, a non-official cover operative, would save him. Agent Miller walked into the room. He carried the grocery bag. He dumped the contents onto the metal table. The frozen peas box, the newspaper, the manila envelope. "It's over, Arthur," Miller said. "We have the decrypts, we have the blueprints, we have the microfiche, and we have your agents." Arthur stared straight ahead. "David Moore is talking," Miller lied. "He's telling us everything, how you blackmailed him, how you threatened his family." Arthur's eye twitched. Sarah Jenkins is weeping in the next room, Miller continued. She says you manipulated her, used her loneliness. Arthur remained silent. And Robert Carter? Miller paused. Robert Carter gave us the codes you gave him. We know about the clean house order. We intercepted the signal, Arthur. We heard it before you did. That broke him. Arthur turned his head slowly to look at Miller. The realization that his secure comms, the lifeline to Moscow, was compromised, shattered his resolve. If the CIA could hear the center, then there was no rescue coming. There was no extraction. He was alone. I want a deal, Arthur said, his voice raspy. I want federal protection. I don't want to go to general population. Start talking, Miller said, sitting down. And we'll see what kind of accommodations we can find. The confession of Arthur Penhaligon was a dam-breaking. He detailed operations going back 5 years. He gave up the locations of 3 other dead drops that hadn't been used yet. He identified 2 other potential recruits he had been assessing. In the other rooms, the reality of treason was setting in. David Moore, the arrogant engineer, was sobbing. He was realizing that he would never drive his Porsche again. He would never see his children grow up. He had traded his life for $40,000 and a thrill. Sarah Jenkins sat in silence. She asked only one question. Did he ever really like me? The agent questioning her didn't have the heart to answer. Robert Carter was the most cooperative. He seemed relieved. The burden of the double life was gone. He confessed to everything, detailing every document he had passed. He knew he was going to prison for the rest of his life, but he looked lighter, as if a physical weight had been removed from his shoulders. At 7:42 p.m. on Saturday, exactly 48 hours after the signal was detected, Elias Thorne walked out of the facility. The rain had returned. He lit a cigarette, sheltering the flame with his hand. The operation was a total success. The glass house, the transparency of the KGB's network, had been shattered. The damage assessment would take months, but the immediate bleeding had stopped. The codes were safe. The submarine designs were secured. The radar blueprints were recovered. But Thorne didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. He thought about the families. He thought about Robert Carter's wife, who was currently being told by agents that her husband was a spy. He thought about David Moore's kids. He thought about Sarah Jenkins' empty apartment. Espionage wasn't a game of laser watches and fast cars. It was a game of human frailty. It was about finding the cracks in a person's soul and prying them open until everything they loved fell through. Thorne finished his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. He looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, the KGB resident was realizing that his network had gone dark. The panic in Moscow would be delicious. Job well done, Miller said, stepping out to join him. Yeah, Thorne said. Until the next signal. The trial of the Alexandria 4 was a closed-door affair. The evidence was too sensitive for a public courtroom. Arthur Penhaligon, the architect, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he provided the CIA with a profile of KGB recruitment techniques that was used to train counterintelligence officers for the next decade. He died in a federal prison hospital in 2004. David Moore was sentenced to 25 years. He served 18. Upon his release, he worked as a handyman, estranged from his family. Sarah Jenkins received 15 years. She was released in 1998. She moved to the Midwest and lived a quiet life, never marrying. Robert Carter received a life sentence. The judge cited the extreme sensitivity of the cryptographic codes as the reason for the severity. He became a chaplain's assistant in prison, counseling other inmates. The operation remained classified until recently. It stands as a masterclass in signals intelligence and surveillance tradecraft. In just 48 hours, the CIA and FBI had taken a single electronic chirp and followed it to the heart of a major spy ring. But for Elias Thorne, the memory wasn't about the tactical victory. It was about the moment in the interrogation room when Arthur Penhaligon realized he had been beaten. It was the look of a man who realized that his loyalty had been given to a system that didn't care if he lived or died. The Cold War was fought in the shadows, in the quiet desperation of ordinary people making terrible choices. And on that rainy weekend in November 1985, the shadows blinked. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the archives of the Cold War, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell us, do you think the government does enough today to protect its secrets? Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know who is watching. If you are just joining us, make sure you are subscribed. We are currently deep inside the 48-hour window that dismantled the Alexandria ring. We left off with the signal being sent. Now we witness the response. Friday morning in Washington, D.C. is usually a symphony of bureaucracy. Traffic jams on I-395, the hustle of lobbyists on K Street, the quiet hum of power shifting in committee rooms. But for the surveillance teams assigned to the Ghostbusters task force, Friday, November 15th, was a study in claustrophobia. The rain that had started the previous night had not let up. It had evolved into a relentless freezing sheet that blurred windshields and turned the Potomac River into a swollen vein of gray sludge. Arthur Penhaligon, our architect, was moving. But he wasn't the only one. The signal sent the previous night had triggered a protocol known in the KGB as rhythm, a synchronized movement of assets designed to clear the decks before an extraction. At 8:15 a.m., the focus of the operation shifted to the first of Arthur's assets, Sarah Jenkins. To understand why Sarah was so critical and so dangerous, we have to look at her life. She lived in a garden apartment in Fairlington, a complex of brick buildings originally built for defense workers during World War II. Sarah was 38, single, and to her neighbors, she was the woman who always watered her plants at exactly 6 p.m. and drove a sensible beige sedan. But inside her apartment, Sarah was living in a pressure cooker. Surveillance logs from that morning detail a woman on the edge of a psychological break. The Ghosts, the FBI surveillance team, had established a static observation post in a maintenance van across the street. Through the telephoto lens, they watched her pace her living room. She wasn't getting ready for work. She was getting ready to commit a felony. Sarah worked at the Naval Sea Systems Command, NAVSA. Her clearance allowed her access to the library, the secure archive where blueprints for everything from hull plating to propeller schematics were stored on microfiche. For 3 years, she had been smuggling these slides out, not in a hollow coin or a false heel, but in the lining of her feminine hygiene products, a method she, correctly, assumed male security guards would be too embarrassed to check. This morning, however, she wasn't going to work. She was going to a dead drop. At 8:42 a.m., Sarah left her apartment. She wore a heavy trench coat and carried a large woven tote bag. She walked to her car, checking the street. She wasn't trained in counter-surveillance like Arthur, so her attempts to clean herself were clumsy. She stopped to tie a shoe that wasn't untied. She adjusted her rearview mirror 3 times before pulling out. Agent Miller, riding in the command vehicle known as Bumper 1, radioed the team. "Target is mobile. Keep it loose. The weather is our enemy today. Do not get burned." Sarah drove to the Cherry Hill Library in Arlington. This was a location the FBI knew well. It was a soft site, a public place with multiple exits, perfect for a brush pass or a drop. Sarah parked in the back lot near the dumpster enclosure. She sat in her car for 12 minutes. This is the agony of the spy game. The wait. She was waiting for a visual signal that the site was clear. What she didn't know was that the clear signal, a soda can placed on a retaining wall, had been placed there by an FBI agent 10 minutes earlier to encourage her to proceed. The CIA wanted her to make the drop. They needed the evidence chain. Finally, Sarah exited the vehicle. She walked into the library, the tote bag clutched tight to her chest. She bypassed the checkout desk and went straight to the reference section, aisle 4, History and Biography. She pulled a thick volume, the Memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant, from the shelf. The surveillance team inside the library consisted of 2 agents posing as college students. One was sitting at a microfiche reader, the other was browsing the periodicals. They watched as Sarah opened the book. She didn't read it. Her hand moved with a quick, jerky motion, sliding a small wax paper envelope into the gap between the book's spine and the binding. She then closed the book and placed it back on the shelf, but she placed it backward, spine in. This was the signal. The drop is loaded. Sarah turned and walked out, her face pale, her breathing shallow. She had just deposited the technical specifications for the U.S. Navy's newest silent propulsion system. As she drove away, the team faced a critical decision. Do they retrieve the package now to confirm the contents, or do they leave it for Arthur? Elias Thorne, monitoring from Langley, made the call. Leave it. If we touch it, we might disturb a hair or a dust particle that Arthur is looking for. He's a pro. He'll check for tamper seals. We wait for the architect. While Sarah Jenkins was navigating the quiet terror of the library, the second member of the ring, David Moore, was creating a different kind of problem. David Moore was the engineer. He worked for a defense contractor in Reston, Virginia, specializing in radar cross-section analysis. If Sarah was the quiet mouse, David was the reckless gambler. He was 41, drove a Porsche 911, and wore Italian suits that cost more than a government employee made in a month. He had been recruited by the KGB not through ideology, but through greed. He had massive debts, gambling debts in Atlantic City, and a mortgage he couldn't service. When David received Arthur's signal, the 911 page, panic set in. David wasn't built for the endgame. He enjoyed the easy money of the long con, passing documents every few months for an envelope of cash. But exfiltration meant leaving his life. It meant leaving the Porsche. It meant leaving the status. At 10:15 a.m., David left his office in Reston. He didn't tell his secretary where he was going. He just grabbed his briefcase and ran to the elevator. The FBI team assigned to David, led by Special Agent Sarah Mackenzie, was caught off guard by his speed. "Target 2 is sprinting," Mac radioed. "He's doing 80 on the on-ramp to the Dulles Toll Road. We are struggling to maintain visual." The rain made high-speed pursuit dangerous. If David crashed, the operation was over. If the